The lecture hall orbited a blue-white star, its curved walls etched with the insignia of a dozen allied species. Rows of cadets sat in disciplined tiers, armor plates muted to academy gray, eyes forward. Among them was Elias Ward, a human male assigned to the far right row where non-combat species were traditionally seated. The designation sat heavy on him, a quiet insult wrapped in bureaucracy. He kept his back straight and his hands folded, the way human protocol demanded when provoked. The instructor paced before the class with an easy predator's confidence. He was tall even by alien standards, shoulders ridged with ceremonial scars, metals clinking softly as he moved. His voice carried without amplification, resonant and assured. He spoke of campaigns along the Persis fringe, of suppression actions and decisive victories. At first it sounded like any other war lecture, until he began to speak of humans. "I have faced them," the instructor said, mandibles flexing in something like a grin. "They scatter when pressed. They cling to rules as if rules stop plasma." A ripple of amusement passed through the hall. Several alien cadets leaned forward, eager. Elias felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the reflexive urge to stand and object, tamped down by years of restraint. The instructor continued, savoring his audience. He described raids on frontier settlements, the speed with which resistance collapsed, the way human units withdrew rather than escalate. "They call it discipline," he said. "I call it weakness." He stopped pacing and turned, his gaze finding Elias, as if drawn by gravity. "You there, human." Elias rose because that was expected. His boots echoed once in the sudden quiet. "Cadet Ward, sir," he said, voice even. The instructor circled him slowly. "Tell us, Cadet Ward, why your kind insists on pretending it belongs in a warrior's academy." Elias chose his words carefully. "We're here to learn, sir. As agreed by treaty." Laughter broke out, sharper this time. The instructor waved it down, pleased. "Treaties," he repeated. "Yes, that is what kept you alive." He leaned close, breath hot and metallic. "I killed humans before your treaties. I will kill them again when they end." Elias met the alien's gaze and said nothing. He had learned that silence was not surrender. It was a fuse. The instructor straightened and addressed the room again, voice swelling with bravado. He spoke of statistics stripped of context, of casualty ratios and broken lines. Each story painted humans as prey, numerous, stubborn, ultimately futile. Elias recognized the technique. Strip the enemy of complexity, and violence becomes sport. As the lecture wore on, Elias became aware of a presence at the back of the hall. He did not turn his head, only noted the shift in posture among the instructors stationed along the walls. Someone had entered without announcement. The instructor noticed too, pausing mid-sentence, irritation flashing across his features before he dismissed it. "No matter," he said. "We were discussing demonstrations." He gestured toward the central floor, a circular arena used for drills. "Theory bores the young," he said. "They need proof." His eyes found Elias again. "Human, you will provide it." A murmur rose. Elias felt heat creep up his neck. He stepped forward because refusal would prove the instructor's point, and compliance was the narrow path humans walked among the stars. As he reached the edge of the arena, he sensed the attention of every cadet, every camera. He also sensed the weight of law pressing down, invisible but absolute. He could not strike first. He could not escalate. He couldn't endure. The instructor followed him into the circle, rolling his shoulders as if loosening for sport. "Observe," he told the class. "I will show you why humans never fight back." He raised a clawed hand, not yet striking, savoring the moment. "They know their limits." Elias steadied his breathing. He thought of instructors back home who taught patience as a weapon, of commanders who said survival was a victory when escalation meant extinction. He thought of how often humanity had been mistaken for harmless because it chose not to bare its teeth. From the back of the hall, a single footstep echoed, measured, deliberate. The instructor's head snapped up, annoyance sharpening into something else. Elias did not look, but he felt the shift in the room, the way laughter died and air seemed to thin. "Hold," a voice said, calm and precise. The instructor sneered, lowering his hand by a fraction. "This is a lesson," he said. "Do not interrupt." The silence that followed was heavier than before, charged with implication. Elias felt it like a held breath, the moment before a storm breaks. Whatever was about to happen, the boast had gone too far, and the universe had leaned in to listen. The instructor turned back to Elias, confidence returning in a practiced mask. "As I was saying," he began, stepping closer, unaware that the line he had crossed could not be uncrossed. Elias realized then that restraint was not the absence of power. It was the discipline to wait until the cost of arrogance came due. The instructor's hand closed around Elias's collar and dragged him fully into the arena, the magnetic seals and Elias's boots disengaging with a faint hiss. The floor's adaptive surface shifted underfoot, hardening into a combat plane. Around them, cadets leaned forward, eyes bright with anticipation. The instructor addressed them as if Elias were already an object, a prop to be positioned for effect. "Watch closely," he said. "This is what restraint looks like when it's born of fear." Elias did not struggle. He centered his weight and kept his hands open, palms visible, the posture drilled into him since induction. His jaw tightened as the instructor shoved him backward, testing balance, provoking a response that did not come. The shove drew laughter. The instructor nodded, pleased, and delivered a short lecture between motions, explaining angles, reach, leverage, always framing the lesson as an autopsy performed before death. "You see," he continued, circling, "humans rely on rules. They confuse permission with morality." He struck Elias's shoulder with the flat of his claw, sharp enough to sting, controlled enough to avoid triggering alarms. Pain teaches faster than words. Elias absorbed the blow and adjusted his stance. He thought of how often humans were praised for endurance, when what they possessed was choice. He let the instructor talk, because talking revealed intent, and intent could be recorded. The instructor paused, glancing toward the back of the hall again. A figure stood there now, unmistakably human, posture relaxed in a way that spoke of authority rather than ease. The instructor scoffed. "Observers," he said. "You're late." The human did not respond immediately. He took a few steps down the aisle, boots echoing with deliberate cadence. His uniform bore no academy markings, only a simple insignia that meant nothing to the alien cadets and everything to Elias. Elias felt a flicker of relief that he quickly smothered. Relief was premature. "Proceed," the human said at last, voice level. The instructor grinned, misreading permission. He seized Elias's arm and twisted, forcing him to one knee. The floor registered the impact. A warning glyph flickered and vanished. The instructor leaned down, speaking softly enough that only Elias could hear. "This is where you beg," he said. "They always do." Elias met his eyes. "No," he said, and meant not defiance but fact. The instructor straightened and addressed the room again, voice rising. He described previous engagements in more detail now, names and places slipping free with the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. He spoke of containment zones burned clean, of evacuations delayed just long enough to teach a lesson. The cadets listened, rapt, while the human observer's gaze never left the instructor. "Sir," the human said, cutting through the monologue. The instructor's mandibles clicked in irritation. "What is it now?" "You've exceeded the scope of instruction," the human replied. "Release the cadet." The instructor laughed. "You humans love your scopes. Very well." He tightened his grip instead. "One more example, then." He raised his arm, claws angling toward Elias's throat, a move calculated to terrify without killing. "Time, stretch then." Elias felt the familiar narrowing, the world compressing to breath and balance, and the line he could not cross. "That will be sufficient," the human said, louder now. The instructor froze, then turned, eyes blazing. "You dare countermand me in my hall?" "I am not countermanding," the human replied. "I am recording." The word hung in the air. The instructor's expression shifted, bravado faltering for the first time. Then he laughed again, louder, sharper. Record this, then. He began listing dates, units, body counts, details no one had ever challenged him on. Each admission landed like a weight. Elias felt it, too, the invisible ledger filling. The human observer raised a hand. Small lights activated along the arena's rim as systems woke. Statement acknowledged, he said. Continue if you wish. The instructor hesitated. Pride won. You see, he told the cadets, sweeping an arm. They think rules will save them. He looked back at Elias. This is mercy. Elias understood then that the demonstration had inverted itself. The instructor believed he was teaching dominance, but he was revealing something else entirely, a failure to recognize when restraint had shifted from choice to consequence. The human observer took one more step forward. Release him, he said, voice unchanged. The instructor opened his mouth to retort. He never finished the sentence. The instructor's retort died in his throat as the human observer moved. There was no flourish to it, no warning posture or dramatic pause. One moment the instructor stood towering over Elias, claws poised. The next, the human's hand rose, compact and efficient, and the air itself seemed to fold. The discharge was brief and contained, a tight burst calibrated to end rather than injure. The instructor collapsed where he stood, momentum arrested mid-gesture, arrogance extinguished with clinical finality. His body struck the arena floor once and did not move again. Silence flooded the hall. Elias remained on one knee, stunned less by the violence than by its precision. There had been no anger in the human's face, no visible satisfaction. Just completion. Around them, cadets froze in postures of disbelief, some half-risen from their seats, others clutching recording devices that suddenly felt incriminating. The human lowered his hand and looked at the fallen instructor as one might regard a concluded equation. Threat neutralized, he said, not loudly, but clearly enough to carry. Action taken under joint authority, subsection combat oversight. He turned slightly, addressing the room without raising his voice. You witnessed a lawful response to a confessed series of violations. No one spoke. Even the station's ambient hum seemed to recede, as if the structure itself were listening. Elias pushed himself to his feet, legs unsteady. He glanced at the instructor's body and felt no triumph, only a sober understanding settling into place. The boast had not been punished for its cruelty. It had been punished for its certainty. The instructor had believed there would be time to threaten, time to humiliate, time to decide when to stop. Humans, Elias realized, did not grant time once a line was crossed. The human authority stepped closer to Elias and spoke quietly. You're clear, he said. Medical will check you. It was not a question. Elias nodded, throat tight. Across the hall, senior alien staff finally found their voices. One began to protest, another to demand explanations. The human turned to face them, posture unchanged. All statements were recorded, he said. All actions are logged. You may review them at your convenience. He gestured toward the arena's edge, where the lights now glowed a steady amber. This session is concluded. No one moved to challenge him. The weight of what had happened pressed down, heavy and undeniable. The cadets had expected spectacle and received doctrine instead, written in the language of consequence. They had seen a human endure humiliation without response, and then witnessed how quickly endurance could end. As security protocols activated and personnel converged, Elias caught fragments of whispered reassessment. Words like miscalculation and oversight drifted through the air. The human authority remained where he was, a fixed point amid the sudden churn, eyes alert but calm. Before leaving, he looked once more at Elias. Remember this, he said, not unkindly. Restraint is a choice. It's not a shield. Elias watched him turn and walk away, steps measured, already moving on to the next obligation. The instructor's body was lifted carefully, almost respectfully, as if the station itself were eager to restore order. Yet nothing felt restored. Something fundamental had shifted, a quiet recalibration spreading outward. As Elias was escorted from the arena, he glanced back at the empty space where bravado had stood moments before. The lesson had been delivered, not with cruelty, but with certainty. And somewhere beyond the walls of the academy, Elias sensed the galaxy would soon begin to reconsider what it thought it knew about humans, and how quickly a boast could become a final mistake. The academy entered lockdown without panic, a controlled tightening of systems that reflected institutional discipline rather than fear. Elias was escorted through familiar corridors that suddenly felt narrower, as if perspective itself had shifted. Medical scans confirmed what he already knew, that he was intact, shaken more in belief than in body. He signed reports, answered questions, and watched as recordings were sealed with layered encryption. Everything proceeded with procedural calm, yet beneath it ran a current of unease that no protocol could smooth over. Word traveled faster than official statements. Alien cadets whispered in clustered knots, their earlier amusement replaced by wary calculation. Some avoided Elias entirely, eyes sliding away as if he carried a contagion. Others watched him with new attention, reassessing posture, tone, distance. He had not struck a blow, yet his presence now implied consequence. That, more than the act itself, unsettled them. Senior staff convened behind closed doors. Elias was not invited, but fragments reached him all the same. Debates over jurisdiction, overreach, precedent. The human authorities' action was dissected from every angle, not to find fault but to understand boundaries that had been assumed flexible. The recordings left little room for interpretation. Confession had been given. Authority had been established. Response had been immediate. Clean. When Elias was finally released, he returned to the lecture hall alone. The arena floor had been reset, its surface pristine, but the absence where the instructor had stood felt conspicuous. A plaque had already been installed at the entrance, temporary and understated, citing a review in progress. It did not name the dead. It did not need to. He sat where he had been seated before, hands folded, and considered the difference between survival and respect. Humanity had long accepted the former as sufficient. Treaties preserved lives. Restraint preserved futures. Yet the galaxy had learned to read restraint as permission. That misunderstanding had ended here, not with a campaign or a declaration, but with a single, irrevocable decision. Later, a message arrived on Elias's terminal. It was brief and signed, routed through channels that suggested oversight rather than familiarity. You did as instructed. That matters. There was no praise, no consolation. Just acknowledgement. Elias found that it steadied him more than reassurance would have. Outside the academy, reactions rippled outward. The instructor's species issued a statement notable for its brevity, expressing regret for procedural failures and withdrawing its personnel pending review. No threats followed. No demands. Silence, Elias realized, could be an admission when words would invite escalation. Classes resumed under revised guidelines. Instructors spoke more carefully, their examples scrubbed of bravado. Humans were no longer addressed as civilians. The change was subtle on paper, profound in practice. Elias felt it in the way questions were phrased, in the extra beat before a joke was made at his expense, and then abandoned. On his final night before reassignment, Elias stood at the viewport and watched the star the station orbited burn with indifferent brilliance. He thought of the human authority, already gone. His role concluded the moment action had been taken. There would be no statues, no stories told in mess halls. That, too, was deliberate. Humanity did not mythologize restraint or its absence. It cataloged outcomes and moved forward. The academy would continue. Cadets would graduate. Conflicts would arise, as they always did. But somewhere in the calculus of power that governed the galaxy, a variable had been corrected. Humans were not weak because they waited. They waited because they chose when an ending was necessary. Elias turned from the glass and prepared to leave. He carried no illusion that this lesson would prevent future arrogance, only the certainty that the next boast would be weighed more carefully. The cost of misjudgment had been demonstrated once. It would not need repeating to be remembered.